Okay, so Nutanix, you've fairly recently published the results of your seventh, I think it is, annual Enterprise Cloud Index survey. And the major
Yeah,
focus, perhaps no surprise this year, everyone's talking about it, is AI opportunities and challenges. So perhaps give us the sort of high level background and then we can drill down a bit into what you actually found out.
yeah. Thanks. I feel really delighted to be here and talking with you about this. So, first off, yeah, AI is a topic for every customer thinking about how do we think about what happens with AI? How would you go and deploy it? There's a lot of actually new issues for particularly infrastructure users and people who support infrastructure. There's things like new GPUs, new LLMs. For many people who are running VMs, these new applications are containerized, right? And so you start thinking about all of that. But what's interesting for me, right, is one of the key topics that is top of mind, is around privacy and the data privacy. It's very interesting, right, that as you start thinking about these models, when you start tuning a model with your data, it can be that the model becomes more proprietary than the data itself. If you think about that for a minute, right? If someone gets a hold of your data, that's one thing, but they still have to synthesize all that. But if you've got a model that really shows how you should be getting insights into your data, you've already done the work. And so there's a lot of issues thinking about this. And as folks think about where the LLMs are coming from, they're largely coming from the public cloud because of the scale. But then they're thinking, how do I insert privacy? So this for me was the biggest kind of aha moment, is this privacy element is really key because it says that we're going to have a hybrid cloud workflow, LLMs built in the public cloud, tuned in an on-prem environment, and then likely run in inferencing at the edge.
Okay, and in terms of the sort of, I suppose, a sort of broad level look at the AI focus, I think the findings were that perhaps not very surprisingly, it's going to cost more to implement AI, but people are expecting a good return on investment, which I mean I admire their optimism because most of the reports I read kind of tell me that everyone's a bit disillusioned. They think AI is fantastic, but it's not delivering the returns. So just what's going on in terms of that finding?
I think we're in the hype cycle. Usually what happens is people get into this sense of inflated expectations, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, like I need to go and really think about this. And we're certainly seeing this in terms of enterprise customers who many times are deploying this in internal applications first. Why? Because they want to protect external usage where you might have hallucinations, for example, or things. And so if you use it internally first, you can focus on the ROI elements. And this is the primary question we ask people first is, do you have a legitimate business purpose that you're going to apply AI to? This is the most critical question because otherwise it can be a science project. And I think that's where some of the disillusion is. People are like, well, but if you have a crisp application area, right, what we're finding is that customers are moving very quickly. Now, what we found in the survey was 52% felt there was going to be more training needed, right, to go and basically take on AI. Thinking about sizing for GPUs. Think about how do you take an LLM? How do you tune an LLM? How do you get containers, for example, deployed? And how do you build this in the public cloud, take a public cloud model and then deploy this in an on-prem environment? That's a hybrid cloud workflow that for many folks is new. So the training is one. And as you mentioned, the other piece I think that's really interesting, right, is some of the challenges are, most people think their infrastructure will have to be upgraded in some way to go and manage this. So we have some really interesting ideas on how you can go and extend the things you do today for business critical workloads and then extend them into AI.
Okay. And you mentioned containers there, and I think the survey found that application containerization is pretty much the new infrastructure or de facto standard. So how is that correct? I mean, think I follow IT closely. I hadn't realized it had got that far, if you like, embedded in organizations. So
yeah, I think for many people, right, there was an initial thinking that containers might be like eliminating the need for virtualization. Right? Here's what we're finding, right, is containerization and virtualization have coexisted for a number of years here because you basically have containers providing the speed of development, right? They're speeding up development processes. They're actually allowing you to go and deploy applications in very diverse environments and eliminating OS dependencies for testing purposes. So it's really actually what would I call it? Complementary to the value that virtualization has delivered in a data center, right? And in fact, for many years here, right, in the data centers that exist, most containers have been deployed in VMs. Why? Because VMs gave you the what we call enterprise resiliency, day two operations, and integrated security, right? That our traditional infrastructure users have been familiar with. What's interesting now is you're starting to watch the wave of containers come in to the environment, right, into data center environments. And now we have customers who are very familiar with managing VMs, who now have to extend their skills into containers. And so if you can provide what we call VM container convergence and say, hey, we're going to go and provide these exactly the same. So you can go and now manage containers at scale, at fleet scale, across distributed environments. That's a really interesting value proposition for customers who are thinking, hey, I need to use the same team that I have and take containers on. So I guess to answer your first part of the question is, Gen AI applications, because they're new, tend to be containerized. As they come in on-prem environments, customers are thinking, hey, how am I going to go and assimilate those with the existing team I have? That's a really important thing. It minimizes that training fear as well, right? If I can take the same data services, for example, think this, snapshots, replication, DR, if I can apply that the same way, it's important because I think most people doing AI are trying to move fast. Most infrastructure people are trying to move safely and securely. These worlds can collide a bit, right? And so what we're offering and talking about is how do you bring the same enterprise resiliency you have for a mission critical database? And AI is just the next application, although it's running containerized LLMs on new GPUs. That's a pretty interesting trick to pull off.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, and I think you did at the top of the interview, Gen AI application adoption, it's happening, growing massive momentum, but it is also challenging, I guess, than what you call the norms around data security and privacy. Do you think
Right.
people have sort of understood? I mean, I'm sure they understand that AI, gives them different problems, but have they really understood to the point I think you explained at the beginning, just
Yeah.
how potentially, a big an issue is security is in terms of what they're doing with the data and what they're creating with it, if you like.
Yeah, listen, I think customers have gone through a couple of different phases, right? I think in the first phase, people were like, hey, I'll build an LLM. And then quickly realize, oh, wait, like the scale, the number of GPUs, the cost, the power, right? The scale at which it requires to build an LLM, it's only the very largest, probably government and some large, certainly hyperscalers and others, right, are going to build LLMs themselves. So now the question became, well, how do I now take an LLM and tune it on my specific data? That's really important because the relevance of the results from Gen AI are really dependent on the quality of the input. It's always been that way. Garbage in, garbage out, that's right. And so the idea that I've got tuned data on or tuned model on my data actually makes it useful, number one. But then you got to think, do I want to put my data into the public cloud? This is becoming actually really relevant for European customers and EMEA customers, because as you start thinking about what's now being called geo repatriation, right? How can I make sure that there's not dependency on a single entity, maybe a single hyperscaler, for example, and I can go and move my data and the applications? If you have a platform means running on servers, right? You've got commonality of servers running in the public cloud. And if you move to a modern infrastructure, you're running servers in an on-prem environment as well. Now I can have a same software platform can run applications, including Gen AI in the public cloud, in your private data center, and you can even scale down out to the edge, which is where a lot of the data is being generated. So now you've got this ability to have this and now what you can say is, if my data is one place, I can move it over time. The exit paths are actually quite, easy. Low switching costs is how I characterize this.
And you mentioned a moment ago that obviously the AI folks are moving at sort of warp speed. but the infrastructure people are, if not resisting, they're not, they haven't got the same, urgency about them. They safe and steady is their motto, if you like. But infrastructure does need to be modernized. So how do you get that necessary modernization to keep in sync? I know there's always a bottleneck. I was talking to someone
Yeah,
yesterday.
sure.
You've got compute networks and storage, and there's somebody that's always, lagging behind the other two, if you like. But how do you get the, infrastructure to somehow get up to speed with what Gen AI is requiring? Gen AI,
Yeah.
sorry.
So one thing we're encouraging customers to consider is that just like the modern clouds are all built on servers, like take your virtual private cloud as well and build that on servers, right? New hardware is coming to servers long before it comes to proprietary storage systems, for example, or separate systems. So the idea that you can take servers and build those out in clusters of servers, that's one of the innovations that hyperconverged infrastructure offers to customers is the ability to use servers, which basically takes the embedded storage in each one of those servers, aggregates it, protects it, and gives you this flexible, scalable platform. Once you do that, now those servers, right, can easily assimilate new GPUs, right? You simply add GPUs into qualified servers, and certainly you can get those from partners. We have partners like Cisco, for example, Dell, HPE, and others, right, that are building servers that are GPU certified. And now I can basically have a GPU certified system, and you can actually start at pretty small scale, Philip, right? And it's pretty interesting. You can start at smaller scale, develop for your application, and then start looking at how you deploy it across different locations. And that's really important as you start thinking about the vertical applications of this. If you're in a retail environment, for example, you wanted to be deploying, let's say, fraud detection in retail outlets. You want to make sure that you can scale to the size of that retail outlet, number one. You want to make sure that that retail outlet is not dependent on an active cloud connection. It needs to be able to run even if the cloud connection is cut, right, from that standpoint. And you want to make sure that you're able to go and tune that right for the use of that local area. Now what you can do is say, hey, guess what? I'm going to go take all of the same security policies that I'm running in my virtual private data center. I can now extend those out to the edge, which could be, let's say, 100 retail outlets. Could also be 20 manufacturing facilities. It could be 1,000 wind farms, right? So as you start thinking about like what this new world looks like, our view is that the data in the future will be more distributed. And so the ability to set forth a common architecture based on servers is a simplifying assumption so that you can run the same software all the way across. And now you can start moving data and applications. And so one last thing just to think about, right, is there are standards now that make it possible to move data and applications seamlessly across this new expanded hybrid cloud world. So for data, and these are both, by the way, hyperscaler standards, right? For data, it's S3, right? S3 means now I can go and have a common standard for moving data across wherever I want to go, all the way to the public cloud or all the way out to the edge. And similarly, for applications, it's Kubernetes, right? And so I start thinking, now I can say applications can move. And so one of the things that's important, right? You mentioned that the infrastructure people tend to be a little bit slower, right? And not because they're not smart and, it's because they cut their teeth on managing downside risk before providing upside. And so the downside is things like, hey, what if the data goes away? Like, how do I recover it? Right? Or what about day two operations? It's not enough just to get something in play. I have to go make sure that I can go update it. A security issue comes up. How do I make sure that I can remediate that in a hurry? When you move to a server-based system, you've got this common software platform across server, storage, network, and I can go and upgrade in a single manner. So all of a sudden, right, what we're finding is, and this is one of the survey results, right, was that you start thinking about if I can use my existing team, and now I can make them container savvy, and I can make them offer them a choice of LLMs over time, choice of Kubernetes environments, choice of GPUs, and I've never made the wrong mistake. I've never made an error. Like I didn't do any somebody described it to me the other day. There was no one-way door, right? The switching costs are still there. So that's one of the things to think about is make sure you've got the ability to change out the things you think are going to change the fastest. In Gen AI, it's the GPUs underneath, right, in the hardware system. It's the Kubernetes platform of choice, and it's the LLMs. That gives you this flexibility, and then you can run any Gen AI application anywhere.
Okay, and you mentioned there obviously you hopefully taking your existing team with you, and I think that's another of the survey's findings that Gen
Yeah.
AI. We've talked a lot obviously about technology, the changes required, but it's also a sort of people thing, and I guess it's sort of change management at a high level, but specifically for this, what are you needing to explain to folks or help them to get to grips with to hopefully keep them on side, as opposed to, I guess, the sort of cliche or whatever is that they're worried they're
Right.
going to lose their job at some stage, I suppose. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, we found that 98% of customers felt that there were challenges in scaling from like dev to production, right? And why is that? Well, a lot of the dev things, you're acting fast, but not necessarily putting in all the security, the privacy issues, right? Around this resiliency, day two operations. So then we found that 52% felt that there was going to be a substantial investment required in training of teams. And so what we're looking at here is if you can go and take existing teams and show them how they can just take a server that happens to have GPUs in it, we can help you size that, for example. Or if you can find a application that is now containerized where you were running VMs before. A lot of people were exposed to VM or to containers, Philip, in the public cloud, but were maybe hoping they would be limited to the public cloud. Now they're finding that those are going to be running in an on-prem environment. How do you make sure that those are exactly the same resiliency, day two operations, and security? And so this idea that you can have security policies follow your data, follow your applications, regardless of where they run, that's this whole concept of running anything anywhere. And that means your existing team, right, can now go and manage these container-based applications with different LLMs, change them out over time, and manage them precisely the same way that they were running a mission-critical database, as I mentioned, or whatever application environment they were running in the past.
Okay, I'm wondering as well, because I think the survey was pretty much a global one. So did you
Yeah.
come across any significant sort of regional variations, or did you look at the verticals as well? So any particular industries were making a good job of it, or should we say a less than good job? Just any observations about variations that were highlighted in the survey?
Yeah, one thing we did find, right, is that as you got to more, let's call them sensitive environments or verticals, right? And so the ones that really stuck out for us were financial services, the government, right? Particularly federal, and then also healthcare. These are environments where, as customers started looking at what you could do, I think what really intrigued customers from the start was the speed when they saw like ChatGPT, for example, for the first time, right? You got to see just the speed at which information came out, and you're like, and secondly, it was that it didn't require a data scientist to interact with the model. When you saw that, you're like, oh, wait, something's different here, right? This is going to take off in a hurry because the speed at which you do something becomes very quickly the standard by which every subsequent activity is measured, right? We know this from commuting, by the way, right? Everybody knows where the fast lights and the slow lights are on their commute, and if there's a fast light and it's fast, no one's disappointed. But if there's a fast light and it acts slow because you've experienced it fast, it doesn't take people long to be now dissatisfied. So that same thing is applying into Gen AI, right? Where once you see how fast you can go get results, whether it's search results or analyzing MRI data, or being able to sort through hundreds or millions of medical claims, you get to see that the pace at which that's working is actually very, very compelling. And so I think from that standpoint, the vertical markets we see this hitting most quickly are going to be those financial service, government, and healthcare markets. And then from a from a regional standpoint, I mean, I'm traveling to Brussels, for example, on Sunday. And one of the key topics is, hey, how do I make sure that my data is not locked into a single provider? What happens if hyperscaler connections are cut? What happens if I need to go and move my data? How do I have the flexibility to make sure that I can use the standards that exist with a platform that runs across different locations, and I can move my data and applications without refactoring them? And that's really important means. So this idea of exit paths and escape paths, I think in Europe is actually playing out very quickly.
Okay, and maybe just in finishing, did the survey findings, did you sort of either in the survey or just from what you've seen, any particular advice or recommendations? I mean, clearly everyone's slightly, at different places on their Gen AI
Right.
journeys, but I guess there must be some common pillars or whatever you want to call them that are pretty much, standard or must be in most projects if they've got a fair chance of succeeding, if you like. So just what you can share there.
Yeah, I think, the things that we saw, number one is if you have identified a specific issue, right, or problem statement that you want to apply Gen AI to, and by that, what we mean is, hey, is there a financial backing for solving this in a more efficient way? What you're finding, for example, right, is that like support co-pilots are a great place for many customers to start. Why? Because they can go and immediately have an internal, which means they're guarded against external exposure, for example, but they can go and look immediately at how they can improve the efficiency of existing internal support teams, who many times have to comb through different disparate data sources and can now go and basically get to a single recommendation much more quickly. We're using this internally at Nutanix, for example. We have our own internal support copilot we built. We're already saving 15% in productivity, which means we're able to solve 15% more cases with our existing teams, right? It's an immediate cost and customer support benefit from that standpoint. So finding that area actually is the most critical part. And then what we're finding is people who are looking at Gen AI and thinking, oh, here's all the new things I have. How can you go and do that with the existing teams I have? So the training costs, which we found that over half of customers were worried about training investment. I want to make sure the training, right, is something where you're providing a career path for your employees, right? And preserving the privacy and data, enterprise resiliency that we've always provided for these applications. So I think those are the two things. Find an application and then look at how to go and apply your enterprise expertise, build your teams, build their careers with more Gen AI expertise over time.
Okay, I mean that's great, and maybe just one more before we finish.
Sure.
It'd just be good to understand a bit about Nutanix, the roadmap. I mean, we've obviously talked about the survey here, but anything you can share as to what we can expect from yourselves, over the next 12 months or so, whether it's specific launches or just your sort of where you're heading, if you like, the direction of travel. So.
Yeah, you bet. So if you think of how Nutanix, started out, it was inventing this category called hyperconverged infrastructure, really made possible by Flash, by the way, right? Flash for the very first time meant that storage latencies were less than network latencies. And that allowed us to build aggregated clusters of servers, right? That eliminated the need for specialized external storage. Now, what we've talked about already is we're going to expand our reach into storage partners. We've announced one of them already. And so you can see we're being asked to do that in part because of many Broadcom customers are looking for alternatives in the marketplace today. So stay tuned on that front, right, for expanding our value, right, beyond just the hyperconverged space. We're also, we've shown that we've extended our platform into server-based hyperscalers. So far, Azure and AWS, right? And you can expect that, we would be thinking about how to go and expand that over time. And then I would say from a Gen AI standpoint specifically, what's very interesting here is that, the close partnership we have with NVIDIA, we were called out, as a partner with NVIDIA on stage. One of the interesting things about this space in Gen AI is that the AI workflow tends to have different storage requirements at different stages. And so in the early stage, you've got basically the need for a data lake. You start thinking about a data lake would be, how do I ingest data sources from many places? You then start thinking about how to process that data in a cache efficient way to, optimize the memory of a GPU. And then subsequently, you may want to archive that in either files or objects. At Nutanix, the storage aspects of what we have, something we call unified storage, means that we've got a scale-out storage system that provides blocks, files, and objects in a consolidated platform. So that means as you start thinking about GenAI, you don't need different storage elements. You can actually consolidate those together into one platform. That's another way that we're converging or consolidating platforms as a way to make sure that one team can do this effectively.
Okay. It's been great to chat, and you shared a lot of great detail about obviously the survey, and specifically obviously about a lot about the Gen AI requirements technology, and then giving us a nice little teaser as to what we can expect from the So no, it's been great to chat, Lee, and I really appreciate the time you've given me. So thank you
Yeah, I
very
really
much.
enjoyed it, Phil. Great questions, and yeah, appreciate your help and support on this. Thank you.
Thanks again.